Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Thanks. Now, Saudi Arabia has forever been behaving in ways that are to most British people barbaric and incomprehensible, but it is all of a sudden that the country has come under more scrutiny here than ever. The latest story, that of an elderly British man who potentially faced a flogging there for being in possession of homemade wine, has caused embarrassment here. And though the government says the decision is not connected, it has today pulled the plug on a deal to help the Saudi justice system. Michael Gove had thought that and has got his way. So does this mark a turning point? Well, as Nick Hopkins reports on the big ticket items, Whitehall's hawks are actually still getting their way.
This was to be a state visit fraught with consequences of the highest importance to both Britain and the Arab world.
1967, full pageantry for a state visit from the rulers of Saudi Arabia. Our two countries could hardly be more different, yet we always roll out the red carpet whenever they come to town.
Secretary of State for Justice, Mr. Secretary Gove.
But today, amid concerns about human rights, Michael Gove cancelled a £6 million contract to help the Saudis run their prisons, a poke in the eye for the Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond.
As the House is aware, the final bid was submitted in April of this year, but discussions have been going on since then, and we have now reviewed this issue further and decided to withdraw our bid.
Over the last 15 years, Britain has bent over backwards to protect and preserve its relationship with Saudi Arabia. At stake, defence contracts worth billions of pounds, intelligence sharing for counter-terrorism operations. Saudi Arabia is our key ally in a volatile region. But today, a crack, one that will have infuriated officials here at the Foreign Office.
Well, I think the cancellation of this contract will make life more difficult. I hope it stops there. I'd be surprised if the Prime Minister, having put so much into our relationship with Saudi Arabia, was willing to see it go down the tubes. Given what's going on in the Middle East and the instability created by ISIL and elsewhere, Saudi Arabia is an important partner in trying to stabilise the Middle East. This is not a moment to be falling out with one of our allies.
Flags across Whitehall at half-mast in January to mark the death of Saudi King Abdullah. Not universally welcomed. And for some Tory MPs, today's message to the Saudis couldn't come soon enough.
They are valued allies, but if you are allies, you're entitled to say sometimes, really, you are not helping yourselves by behaving in a way which puts you completely at variance with the bulk of the international community. And actually, maybe we're better friends to the Saudis if we tell them that and urge them to reform and actually come to terms with a more modern and pluralistic world that would actually be in their long-term interests.
And all this on the day the plight of this Britain became front-page news. 74-year-old Carl Andre was jailed for a year in Saudi Arabia for possessing homemade wine. David Cameron will write to the Saudis about his case. Cancelling the prison's contract and sticking up for Mr. Andre were moves that cheered human rights groups. But make no mistake, on the big-ticket issues, money talks. There was an almighty row in government earlier this year when Vince Cable, then Business Secretary, questioned why we were selling a consignment of paveway bombs to Riyadh. His concern was that these bombs could be used against civilians in Yemen's civil war. The MOD was furious at this intervention, and though Cable did manage to secure some reassurances over the use of these weapons, the contract went ahead and the bombs are being used in Yemen. Newsnight has learned that during the standoff, defence officials warned that the Saudis were running out of bombs and it was our job to resupply them. Planes were on the runway waiting to deliver. To get the licence signed, the MOD agreed to embed British personnel in the Saudi Air Force to keep an eye on them. But they have no powers of veto. They liaise, nothing more. So today is probably no more than a minor slip. The government insists all our arms contracts with Saudi Arabia are above board. The relationship goes on.
With us for the duration, former tax personality of the year. I kid you not. Financial Secretary of the Treasury, David Gove, and former train spotter of the year. Probably I just made that bit up. Shadow Transport Secretary, Lillian Greenwood. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Andre. That was quite funny. Now, yesterday, Downing Street announced that the government is to cancel a £5.9 million contract to provide a training programme for prisons in Saudi Arabia. The announcement was seen as a significant victory for the Justice Secretary, Michael Gove, whose attempts to cancel the project had been resisted by other members of the Cabinet, including the Prime Minister. Not everyone's happy, though. Take a look at this exchange in the Commons yesterday afternoon.
In April of this year, but discussions have been going on since then, and we have now reviewed this issue further and decided to withdraw our bid.
Sir Alan Duncan.
Mr. Speaker, deny it though he might, there are many who are left with the impression that this decision has been guided more by my right honourable friend's rather caustic personal view of Saudi Arabia than it has really been by any legitimate concerns of his department's policy on justice. Can he not accept that, in fact, when we look at a country whose judicial system we do not, in many respects, approve of, engagement is far better than disengagement, and that disengagement may be a comfortable moral position, but it leads to no progress whatsoever?
I take very seriously my right honourable friend's comments. He's absolutely right that constructive engagement with governments like Saudi Arabia is always the wisest course, but there is always a balance to be struck in the nature of the engagement that we make.
Well, David Gauke, just a few weeks ago, Justice Minister Andrew Sellis defended the deal, saying it would be detrimental to Britain's wider interest to withdraw. What changed?
Well, there's been a review of everything done in terms of the particular organisation that has been wound up in terms of support internationally. Partly you've got to remember that there's a big prison reform project going on in the UK, which is why more resources are being devoted to that rather than
but that's not why this deal
elsewhere.
was.
Well, I think that's part of it. But look, there's always a balance that has to be struck, as Michael Gove is saying in the clip there, between engagement and deciding which are the things that are appropriate for us to do and which are the things that are not appropriate.
So why did you sign it in the first place? I mean,
well,
if it isn't
signed.
right, but I mean, or agreed to it. If it wasn't right and isn't right to go ahead with a deal and that level of engagement with Saudi Arabia, and that was decided in the last few days, why was it right to consider it in the first place?
Well, as I say, nothing was signed. It was considered, and this project was set up in April. But
why?
Particularly, well, in terms of whether there's anything beneficial that we can do in terms of helping the Saudi prison system. But the position is that there is, Michael Gove is pursuing an ambitious programme of reform in the UK, so that's why resources are being directed more towards the UK. In that context, there's a review of all types of things that were being done there, and it was concluded that we wouldn't go ahead with this particular project.
But that's not the real reason. I mean, Michael Gove has never made a secret of the fact that he just doesn't think this is the sort of engagement that the government should have with Saudi Arabia. I mean, Saudi Arabia carries out the same atrocities that the government condemns ISIS for, including beheadings and public floggings. In fact, I think they beheaded more people than ISIS have over the last 12 months. Is that the reason that this deal has been scrapped?
Well, I'm not denying that there, we've all got serious concerns about the Saudi system.
Yes,
and
but you didn't originally
judgment.
because you were going to go ahead with it.
There is a judgment. There was no final decision was made because it hadn't, as I say, it hadn't been signed. But there is a decision that has to be made on, if you like, a case-by-case basis with a country like Saudi Arabia as to which projects we go ahead with, where we think that we can actually help and indeed potentially improve their human rights record, and which ones that we feel aren't right for us. And a decision has been made in this particular case not to go ahead.
Well, what do you think? I mean, Philip Hammond said Michael Gove was naive in backing the withdrawal of the bid. That's certainly what was reported, and we heard Alan Duncan say the same. Are they right?
No, I'm not. You know, I don't know what the discussions were had, but I think there's a fine judgment to be made in circumstances like this as to whether this is something that we should be going ahead with. I think everyone shares concerns.
Should we be engaged with Saudi Arabia at all, bearing in mind the sorts of atrocities that are carried out in that country?
Yes, I think we should.
Right. So why not with this particular instance? I know you've said about the big prison project that's going on here, but why is this different?
The reason why we should be engaged, we don't choose who are the important players in the world. Saudi Arabia is a very important country, and it's right that we do engage with a country like Saudi Arabia. But then that still leaves the question as to particular projects, particular aspects where I think we have to make a decision on a case-by-case judgment at a time when there's a lot of prison reform going on, at a time when I don't deny there are heightened concerns about the Saudi Arabian legal and penal system.
Well, what impact will it have in the case of this pensioner, Carl Andre?
I'm not sure that this decision will have an impact on that particular case.
That's not what former ambassadors are saying, that actually they're saying that engagement with Saudi Arabia is more important in order to leverage some sort of influence in cases precisely like this.
But there continues to be engagement. On this particular case, there's been ministerial engagement. There's been engagement from our diplomatic staff for some months in this particular case, as I understand it. So, of course, we are engaged with that particular gentleman's case. And making the case to Saudi Arabia.
Lillian Greenwood, is engagement better than disengagement with regimes like Saudi?
Well, I think we have to use all types of diplomatic pressure to try to get Saudis to...
Sure, but I mean engagement in terms of business deals. I mean, British and Saudi companies have more than 200 joint ventures together. Is that right?
I think we can't have a blanket view, but it was obviously very difficult to be taking an active part in the Saudi prison system when we've got such very serious concerns about the way in which they treat prisoners and administer justice. And I think it was the right decision by Michael Gove yesterday to end that contract, the contract that shouldn't have been in place in the first place. And we've got to use those pressures to try to ensure that the sort of our values around democracy and around human rights are extended to other countries of the world, including Saudi Arabia.
Right, but where would you draw the line? I mean, what other sort of link-ups that Britain has with Saudi, should they be unravelled too?
Well, I don't have a clear position about every sort of link-up, and quite rightly that's a matter for my colleagues in other departments. But I think we should look at what are the best ways in which we can achieve the sort of change that we'd like to see in countries that don't have a good record on human rights, and we have to see what pressures are going to lead to those changes. We need to be pragmatic about our choice of tactics.
You said we don't get to choose who's powerful in the world and who isn't. That's true. But we do get a big say in the choice of who should head the UN Human Rights Commission. Why did we choose Saudi Arabia?
I don't know the answer to that.
That's what the government did. Is it an attempt to show that satire isn't dead?
Well, look, I come back to the wider point. We have to engage with those.
I'm not arguing with that. What I'm saying is that in a country notorious for beheadings, for crucifixions, and for multiple lashings, we chose to back them to become head of the UN Human Rights Commission.
Well, as I say, I don't know the details behind that particular
I've just told
decision.
You.
Well, yes, but I don't know who the alternative options were.
Well, it could only have been worse if it was North Korea.
Well, I'm not quite sure about that, but I do think that we have to engage with Saudi Arabia to move them in the right direction.
You can engage with any country and not say they should be head of the UN Human Rights Commission.
Well, look,
I mean, it's a joke, isn't it? It's a bad joke.
Yeah, look, there are, I don't know the particular circumstances behind that decision and the various, runners and riders for that particular position. But, as I say, I do think that we have got to, I think Lillian's quite right, be pragmatic in the ways in which we can try to influence Saudi Arabia to move in the right direction.
Let's move on to something that you will know a little bit more about.
I've been getting away with